Welcome, folks, to WERA's Hot Topic. Next in the series, this is the student selection and programming solutions for highly capable learner programs. We're grateful that you could join us today. We've got an excellent presentation and some fantastic panelists. So I wanted to jump on here first and thank you for being here. My name is Brian Rick. I'm the Director for Research and Assessment in the Bellingham School District and President of WERA. WERA's mission is to improve the professional practice of educators, those engaged in assessing student performance, evaluating programs, conducting and applying ed research, and using data to inform instructional decisions. We've had a challenging year, and Brian, if you could slide over that next slide there, if you don't mind, thank you. We've many of you know we've been around for 54 years now. Have been a forum for educators and scholars who are passionate about applying what they learned in research into the field. This year was a challenge for us. We wanted to be able to have our in-person conference, but it's not safe. So we're an OSPI normally do something in December, and we, like lots of folks, have pivoted and doing something else. So for the 2021 year, we have our virtual learning series. And we're going to have single topic webinars such as this one, expert panels, discussions, social events. We're going to be doing many things this year that hopefully will provide for you timely and critical support that you need, because these are extraordinary times. So on behalf of WERA, thank you for joining us. We appreciate your help. And I'm now going to turn it over to Brian Gable.
Yes, we definitely appreciate your help. Thank you so much to everybody who has joined today. So my name is Brian Gable. I'm the Director of Assessment and Program Evaluation at the Clover Park School District. I'm a WERA board member and also the organizer of today's Hot Topic webinar, Student Selection and Programming Solutions for the Highly Capable Program. Joining us, Professor of Educational Psychology from the University of Washington, we have Nancy Herzog. Also, a professor from the Graduate School of Education at Whitworth University, Jan Lepine. Jody Hess from OSPI, who is the highly capable program specialist that all of us know pretty well. She is also joining us. These three will be presenting today. From the Renton School District, the Chief of Curriculum, Instruction, and Assessment, John Stadler. Director of Advanced Learning from the Bellevue School District, Laura McHugh, is also with us today. The supervisor of compensatory and highly capable programs from the Clover Park School District, my colleague, Erin Vidal. From the East Side, Pasco School District, an NBCT and highly capable teacher on special assignment, we have Sarah Pack. And wrapping up the panel, the Executive Director of Families of Color Seattle, Christine Tang. Following these introductions, we're going to have Nancy, Jan, and Jody give their presentation, a 20-minute presentation titled Student Selection and Program Solutions in a Pandemic, followed by a Q&A session moderated by the Director of Teaching and Learning at the Bellingham School District, Trina Hall. Thank you guys all for being here. I really appreciate it. All of us do. We can't wait to learn from you. Before we start, a few pieces of etiquette. If you are a non-panelist, please mute your microphone and turn off your camera. If you have questions for the panel, please type them into the chat box. The whole time we'll be monitoring those. All questions will be reviewed by the presenters in OSPI. Select questions will be presented to the panelists as time allows. After the webinar, look for an email from WERA. In that email, you're going to get a PDF of the presentation you're about to see today, as well as a WERA survey. We would like your input. I am WERA, you are WERA, we are WERA. These webinars, these PD sessions are all based on your input, things that you want to hear. So please fill that out and give us some ideas for new sessions of the like. All right. I guarantee you'll see some. And without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Nancy, Jan, and Jody. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, everybody. This is Nancy. Jan is going to do the slide deck, and Jody is first up.
Oh, hello, everybody. I'm glad to be here. I'm going to do a kind of a capsule for the context of what we're talking about today. I'm going to speak to what the law tells us we need to be doing for highly capable identification and service, and a little bit about what the law does not require of us. So this is the WAC, which defines students who are highly capable. And I wanted to draw your attention to some of the important information. What we haven't paid attention to over the years sometimes is the potential for performing at significantly advanced levels and so forth. So we're looking for students of high performance and students of high potential. We also are looking for students who might need services compared to others from the same age, experience, or environment. In other words, looking at your peers and looking at local norms. And finally, within a specific domain, in other words, if we have a student who is demonstrating strengths in math or in ELA, the student needs to be served in that domain. They don't need to be eligible across the board for services. That's simply not good practice. It's not good assessment, nor is it good instructional practice. So when we identify the need, we need to address it within a specific domain. So we see that this is a 2017 legislative session. This was quite a change to address the disproportionality that is caused by barriers to equitable identification. An example of one of the barriers might be Saturday testing or after school testing. Low-income students may not have access to that. So for many of us, this was quite a different focus in terms of our identification process. Other barriers, English-only testing, our homeless or transient students have challenges, and so forth. This is another change that came about in the 2018 legislative session. And it was the attempt of the legislature to further define what kind of criteria addresses equity. So if you notice in the first paragraph there, clearly stated and implemented is important. However, it does not mean that your procedure for every student that you're considering has to be identical. It doesn't have to have a standard that everyone has to meet. That is contrary to the intent of the law at this point. In section A there, you see multiple criteria, and that is to be considered as a whole. There is reference to multiple pathways. And again, there's no one standard for assessments. In section B, we are talking about the issue again of local norms. In other words, comparing students or looking for those students who demonstrate need for more services compared to those students that come from the same background. And again, this is another continuation of that previous slide. So subjective measures, as you see in section C, are only used in support. They are not used to disqualify. And section B is one that we find challenging, but we're seeing how we can work toward this. So the goal is not to have a barrier for students who with limited or non-English speaking. So the direction is, to the extent practicable, screening and assessment given in the native language of the student. If that's not available, then we are to use nonverbal assessments. And that is a challenge because there are not many assessments for native language of our very diverse student population. And finally, this is the first time that we actually have been charged, OSPI has been charged with providing guidance to districts. And we are told that we need to update and align with evidence-based practices. In other words, when we know better, we must do better. So what do we mean by addressing this priority for the disproportionality? It means that we need you to be a talent scout. If you're looking at your English learners, talk with their teachers and parents who are working with students about the acquisition of language. Be sure your teaching staff knows what indicators to look for in terms of evidence of need. Look at authentic student performance for evidence of the need for services. And ask yourself, where are the unmet needs of those students who are not served well by the general education program?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think
Nancy?
Jody. Yeah, okay, great. So today we're really going to talk about, in COVID land, what can you see that gives you indication for what the learning needs are. So this quote is really just saying, you know, that we can't always see advanced learning unless we give opportunities for doing this and for fulfillment. So again, we're trying to match what the child has potential according to the definition here in Washington, as well as what the child is already performing, and try to nurture that in all cases. So you can see these are just examples. Go ahead, Jan. This is the problem though, and I want to acknowledge now in the context that we're living, we already know for more than a quarter of a century that the gifted programs have not been diverse. We have not been equitably giving students access to our advanced learning programs. And now even more so in the era of COVID and online learning and disparities, we also know the people that are suffering most from what's going on in the world are those who have been traditionally underserved, those in poverty, those of children of color. And so we need to think now really innovatively and creatively how we can do two things. One is identify their strengths, and two, develop innovative and creative programs to actually address their strengths. So again, this is from the National Research on Gifted, and we know that we have this problem, and we know we don't have a lot of data that says exactly what works. Go ahead, Jan. And so this is a disclaimer, right? That we're not ever, go ahead. I think, yeah, that there's no one way perfectly to identify highly capable students. And I think we have to start applying an equity lens and look for better ways of giving students access to advanced learning opportunities. Okay. So again, think back about the purpose of identification. And this is where in the state of Washington, we're trying to change the mindset. You're not looking for who is gifted. You're looking for students who need enhanced and advanced learning experiences. And you're considering multiple ways to provide that, because they can show that they need 1 year above grade level, 2 years above grade level, or things in their own language to show that they have these academic strengths. So you need to consider multiple ways. And then again, I come from a very classroom orientation where the environment is everything. You focus on creating classrooms that challenge all students. And that's where you include those who show potential and those who have significantly advanced academic abilities. Okay. So in order to access gifted education, you also need to have equity in assessment. And just today, I shared this with some of our panel members. Renzulli sent a document through his Renzulli Learning information, and he talked about the difference between assessment of learning and assessment for learning. And I think the assessment for learning gives us a framework to look at what we want to do today, which is how can we assess and then match that assessment from what we see. So again, assessment is what you have to do in order to assure that you're addressing the learning needs. And again, the more sources you have, the better that you have. Sorry, Jan, can you go back one? Mm-hmm. Again, thinking that the other thing you have to be careful is, in the old way, gifted programs used to be whoever's gifted gets the same treatment, right? In what we have to do here in Washington is to have an array of services so that the unique learning needs can match the services. So again, you'll notice that the sources of data are used to identify strengths and to indicate what services are needed. Thanks, go ahead. So again, this is just the research that shows the need for advanced learning opportunities and for a match, just that we know that their well-being is influenced by the educational environment, the educational fit or lack thereof, and access to an alignment to services. And I want to speak for 1 minute about the educational environment. We also know that gifted programs are not necessarily the places where Black and brown children feel comfortable, or where their expectations are seen as high by their teachers. So there's a lot more that goes on to just placement into academic programs. There's also professional development for teachers to see the strengths of all children and to make those environments cohesive and inclusive environments where all children can learn. Okay. So today we're really going to talk about not that you all can't give testing as you already have, but thinking about the body of evidence that you can use in these times. And, you know, maybe although you're still looking for all kids, maybe you can take really a sound look at what you have. So putting all your data out there to make your database decisions, including quantitative and qualitative data. And again, I want to emphasize that when the WAC says use local norms, that's if you've used standardized testing for everybody. It doesn't make sense to use local norms if they're not being used systematically and they're not being used on standardized tests. And we'll talk more about that later. Go ahead. So how do we match these needs? We have to start thinking about, what does the data say? What questions do they raise? And what should we do with the data? Okay, so there are 3 ways that data can assist us. It can highlight the need for services, it can inform the structure and design of services, and it can help us examine the effectiveness. Okay. And basically what we're trying to do is, when you look at individual student data, you're going to see that some students are strong in just one area, math, reading, science. And so we want to be flexible and provide a continuum of services. What we don't want to keep doing is what we've done for years, is imagine that all advanced kids need 2 years above grade level in some external program, right? We want to look at a continuum. If some kids just need differentiation in one topic, let's give them that. If they need 4 years above grade level, let's give them a unique learning plan so that they get what they need. All right, so my last slide is to get you to think differently, right? To shift from identifying gifted, who's gifted, to identifying children who need advanced learning, and to shift from the one program to thinking about services, an array of services. And then again, I think the best recommendation is that you focus on the teaching in those classrooms, make it rich, make it inviting, make it, you know, advanced and accelerated and enriched, so that you can challenge children, because instruction matters to all children, and especially tapping into students' interests and strengths. Okay, Jan, it's all yours.
Some of the things that Nancy, Jody, and I also wanted to articulate is to begin to consider other kinds of characteristics that may help us to identify potential. there are a laundry list of characteristics in the field of gifted education that say that a gifted child has this characteristic versus this characteristic. And in most cases, you have to think about where that research comes from, which is whoever made that study and found that characteristic had a certain specific subgroup of students. And in some cases, it may have been only students who were in the program who traditionally have been of Caucasian descent or Asian descent. And so what we end up having are characteristics that are predominantly not looked through in terms of equity or a lens of different types of populations of young people who certainly do demonstrate talent. So if we even think about ELL learners, code switching requires a lot of reasoning and an ability to juggle multiple languages. And if you think about it, code switching may be an indicator when we begin to look at kids. The ability to translate. I recall a young man that I worked with in Montana, and he had come to Billings, Montana, because he and his family members were airlifted out of Cambodia at the time. He was a Hmong student of ours. And when you looked at his ability to translate information about schooling to his parents, because his parents didn't speak English, and then revert right back to English, it was an incredible sense of reasoning and talent and abstract thinking that we might not have looked at or thought about simply because we were dealing with a population of students that were not diverse. The speed of English language acquisition has been looked at as well in EL learners. So when we look at the tests that students who are coming in with English as a second language, when you look at those tests from year to year, students, when compared with similar age and experience, you can look at those and that may indicate a child, if they have grown a great deal in English language acquisition, may talk about the speed and pace of learning that they have. That may also translate into potential and a need for services. So I guess what we're saying is that there's a lot of funds of knowledge that we have not looked at when you look at culture and the impact and the gifts that culture brings to a child versus a different child from a different culture. Rapid rates of acculturation. Kids who know family history, kids who have been part of their culture for a very long time, all of those things can contribute to our look at potential, to look beyond traditional standardized testing. And it adds to our ability to be talent scouts and to work with other people in our school communities to really identify students of diversity. Curriculum and instruction. We used to say in the field that oftentimes it's the response to the curriculum that may indicate to you that a child needs some services. And if you think about it, if you do give curriculum and you have these learning experiences set up for young people, some of the kids that are responding at a faster rate, learning it very quickly, typically can do it without very much practice because they've already mastered it in a previous grade level. Those should be key signs to somebody to say that there may be a need for a different service. Curriculum is always going to be the issue with advanced students. They can't get access to curriculum above the grade level. They can't get it if somebody doesn't change the curriculum for them in a classroom setting. So curricular responsiveness may be an indicator during the times of COVID for all of us to kind of put our watching eyes on in our observations in order to identify students as they are interacting with the curriculums that we provide for them. Also, obviously, being much more inclusive about cultural responsive teaching and looking at the diverse nature. When I worked in Hartford, Connecticut, the student population was majority was Hispanic and Jamaican and African American. And if you looked at some of the things that were going on at the elementary school, what was a fun event every Friday was to go to an oratorical contest that a school had for groups of kids, that they'd be given a topic and they got to sign up randomly on taking up a debatable issue. And if you looked at that, that was an actual performance that you could look at embedded in a cultural setting that may reveal to you good reasoning, skills that some people, some students are using, or how they've even crafted their passionate debate. So we need to look at how kids are responding within ways that are culturally relevant to them, and also in response to what they share. A program that we do like to highlight in the field of gifted education is one that is a part of Fairfax County Public Schools. And for many years, they have had what was called the Young Scholars Program, and they still have it. And that program actually is, parts of the program are based on developing talent, providing opportunity for talent, to provide curricular experiences that pre-test young people in order to make modifications to the curriculum so kids can advance. And so if you think about it, if we're working in diverse schools, it may be a more advantageous right now to actually provide opportunity to young people so that we can be able to identify that potential. If we go about the same business of never looking for something different or providing a great opportunity for young people, we're not going to see talent being used. And so this is one program that does that, and it grows talent by providing opportunities that kids traditionally in gifted programs would have been offered, so that they can experience what kinds of things that we end up doing in programs in gifted education. In identification procedures right now, of course, districts have a choice in what kinds of measurements you use and what kinds of decisions you make. But there are some considerations. I think that we have to be very considerate at this point that you have a lot of data. Data exists from previous years. We have data that classroom teachers are actually using in a classroom to perhaps pre-assess a child's reading readiness and mathematics readiness that could be used, again, as indicators of potential so that we could serve that child more appropriately. We also have to consider evidence from looking at data relevant to identifying a body of evidence for English learners. So looking at those tests and assessments that we have given, and maybe looking at the comparing a child with other children in terms of their language acquisition may give you a hint into who may need to be served. Also, we have to think about right now, trauma is going to be an issue. We have young people in learning situations right now that are not helpful to them, and it is causing some trauma. So considering multiple years of data to begin to look for trends in a pattern in a child's strength. And the idea of looking at data isn't to say, where are they deficit? In the field of gifted, we want to look at where are the strengths and where is that child moving towards? And is there a chance that if we were to give them a service and be able to better match and align the service to what they need, those kids would continually grow or even grow at a faster rate? I think also we have testing that has been done in special ed, and in most cases, there's discrepancy in some of the tests that young people take, and that's a perfect place to begin to look for 2E students. Typically, when there's a 30-point discretion between written and performance, you're going to be able to find yourself a child that may need services who are twice exceptional. So if we're not working with the special ed department, who already carries out a whole slug of different kinds of assessments, and begin to look for children who may benefit from also gifted education services, then shame on us if we're not collaborating with our colleagues to find that population. What I would stay away from are really, really strict cut scores right now. I don't think ever they're very helpful because of standard error measurement issues. I think instead ask which students really need services based on the evidence that you've gathered. When we're looking at a plethora of data, whether it's standardized achievement or COGATs or observations or data from teachers' recommendations, what you have is evidence and profiles of children at that time and place. And what you want to be able to do is look for the trends, not to say that they're in a gifted program or you're out, but to actually see where the profiles or strengths are to say what kind of service then needs to be aligned to that. Not all kids need a cluster group, but some kids need cluster grouping. As Nancy said, not all kids need grade skipping, but a few kids may need grade skipping. Some kids may need subject acceleration, but not all of the population. And that's how this field of gifted education has really changed over time. Also, if you're using teacher referrals, to be honest with you, the research hasn't held up very well on teacher referrals unless teachers are trained in looking at some of those characteristics, but realize characteristics are developed in young people. They're developed. And so if you've never had opportunity in the first place to have your curiosity develop, for goodness sakes, that's why we have to provide some opportunity in a setting where that could be observed. So teacher referrals, their rate of identifying kids is better if you have a great professional development to share with people that not all these kids have these traits. In fact, some of the traits listed would actually do damage for a child, particularly who's 2E. Not all kids are voracious readers. Not all kids write well who are in this population. So those characteristics can fool you a little bit because they're based on some populations of students who have been looked at in gifted programs versus not. Universal screening or data, the only way to look at local norms is really to have all young people take the assessment, whatever assessment that you're giving. So some decisions should be made based on the fact that all kids are being looked at based on some kind of criteria that you're identifying in your school. Local norms seem to be better indicators, and really school-based norms are better indicators than a national norm, because those in most cases, not all, in most cases, you want to compare your students with the kids who are going to the schools together or the district, rather than comparing against an artificial external group of kids that may not have the same demographic structure as your kids in your district. And then examine other sources of data. As a GT coordinator, I often had grade level meetings, and I would go to them and say, we do have some test scores on kids. That evidence should be very clear, but who really is not showing up that should show up? Who have you seen on your classroom-based assessments that need an alternative service in order to continue their growth patterns? And through that, teachers keep data all the time. And if well trained about the diversity in this population of in groups of kids, we should be able to use a lot more classroom-based assessment in order to inform some of our decisions about identification. Norms matter, and the reason a norm matters is it increases representation of the demographic groups. And so you'll be receiving a PDF, but you can take a look that when using local norms as compared to national norms, each subgroup of population of the ones that are identified in the first row actually increase. And so it's broadening a look at giftedness, and then coming to the realization that giftedness is developed. It's not the thing you got and others didn't. It's things that are grown over time by the work that we provide young people to develop their talent over time. Norms matter because when you compare a 5th grade ELL student who learns English twice as fast as other ELL students, that student likely has a talent in regards to language. And when compared nationally to all 5th grade students, that child's score is actually maybe lower. And so in their own environment, you would want to honor their strengths rather than making the comparison at a national level. That's why these norms do matter, and it's good to look at those when you're making some selections with young people during this time. These, again, show what ends up happening about how core instruction likely is going to be affected. When we have many, many elementary schools in a district, oftentimes where that school is placed may have the same curriculum, but the implementation of that curriculum may look different depending on the demographics of the school. And so it could be that some students in some schools may not have the equal kind of opportunities and access to really rich curriculum innovation due to the demographic and due to the readiness levels of many of the young people and prior experiences. And so as you can see from these, you can see two different districts and the breakdown of the percentage of kids in the program. The delivery of instruction will look really quite different in each of those. So when we're comparing kids who come from a low SES environment, who have not had lots of opportunities, not to say that all low SES don't have opportunities, because some do. When you compare that against high opportunity, it's pretty hard to make that comparison. And so the suggestion has always been to go right back to that local elementary school so that the students who, when compared with age, experience, and environment, who there is going to need some curricular changes and services through a gifted education program actually could promote that talent growth over time. So the possibilities are, preparing preparation programs. A lot of our young people just don't have the kinds of experiences, to a Odyssey of a Mind program or a math counts programs, lots of programs that help build your talent that we provide for kids, but yet don't allow others to have. Think about expanding your awareness and expanded definitions of gifted. The top 1%, the top 5%, those things don't hold up against the research anymore. At one point, we just didn't even question it. Now we do, because there's just too much difference in what it means to grow your talent over time and maybe become gifted, whatever that means. But we do know that curricular changes need to be provided in order to grow anybody's talent. And that's what we're looking for, are those students who may need it. So these are just possibilities that are coming through the research at the National Center for Research on Gifted Education that we would like you to think about as we take a much more strength-based approach rather than a deficit approach. Who has some strengths that need some services, and what service will we provide is sort of how we're looking at changes. The important thing, even if you don't have all of the assessment tools, there will be kids who will let you know that they need some changes in that curriculum. And for me, whether you can identify them or not, the issue for me is develop the potential and serve the need. No child should have to wait to have access to curriculum in reading when they're reading a year above the grade level, simply because we don't have a test to tell us that. It would make just sense to me that we would identify and we would provide a service, and whether that service is coming through the classroom, knowing that that teacher will make the modification, or through a cluster group that the district already has it in place. I think the real gift of gifted education is to recognize and serve kids regardless of the fact that you have a formal identification pattern. So I think we are at the end of our presentation, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we'll turn it back over to you, Brian.
Thank you. I'm going to actually turn it right over to Trina, who is moderating the Q&A.
Okay. Thank you, both Dr. Herzog and Dr. Levine. And Jody, very helpful. One of the things I was thinking would be helpful from the panel is when we think of the portfolio collection and really looking at other things besides just standardized test scores in our identification process, and then match that with the circumstance we have right now where teachers are just extremely overwhelmed and in an environment that that is all new to them. I'm wondering what are ways that districts can make the collection of these data efficient and feasible. So I'm opening it up to the three of you or any other panel members who might have some ideas about thinking of a wider array of identification measures and how to make that feasible and efficient within our given circumstance.
It looks like Sarah would like to answer.
I was swatting a fly, but I'm happy to answer. So efficient and feasible. One of the problems that we've run into is there is a desire to do things like teacher surveys and collect that teacher feedback on some of the characteristics that they may see. But we understand that in order for that data to be reliable and I mean, feasible to use in our identification practices, we need to be able to train our teachers consistently and consistently K-12. So one of the things that we're doing to kind of look at this is thinking about how we're going to be using subjective data, and then specifically when in the process we would be looking at that subjective data. We're certainly looking at opportunities to collect some more objective data this school year, if possible. We're looking at options of just using the existing objective data if we are not able to collect some more this year. But if we do need to fall back on that subjective data, only doing it as a way of checking our no or our not yet to service recommendations. And just looking at those students that once we've looked at that objective data, we've said, yeah, we don't know if they're quite ready for some kind of a service just yet, then we can start looking into that subjective data to start doing some of that talent scout, talent searching.
Can I answer a little bit of that?
Please.
So, as Sarah was talking, I kept thinking about this. This is a book I want to write someday, and it's called Decision Makers, because teachers are decision makers in every second of every day. You know, when they have kids in their classroom, they're making decisions about who to pay attention to, who to ignore. When they're making decisions about teaching instructional strategies, who to do small group, who to do individuals, whatever. So this idea that subjective data is somehow not as good as objective data, as a qualitative researcher, I push back on that, because teachers have the expertise, they have the students, and they're making those kinds of instructional decisions every single day. So I just hope that teachers in this time period will garner that empowerment and say, yes, I know what this child needs, whether or not it's subjective or objective, or whether or not it's standardized or classroom based. The most relevant material for whether or not a child needs advanced instruction is relevant material about what that child is currently doing. So again, I wouldn't be fearful in this time period of using what the teachers are assessing curriculum wise, who needs advanced reading, who needs advanced math. And especially my area is young children. The more standardized assessments you use on young children, the less reliable data you really have, you know, and that's coming from the National Association for the Education of Young Children. So hopefully all of you who are teachers will be empowered to make those decisions about who needs advanced instruction.
Thank you, Nancy, and thank you, Sarah. Christine, I see your hand is up.
Yes, hi, this is Christine Tang with Folks. Thank you for having me on the panel. It's great to be here with all these wonderful people and experts in HiCap. I wanted to address the challenge of identifying providing services for students enrolled in public schools and doing distance learning. And we're in such a district here in Seattle. And I wanted to acknowledge how difficult it is for teachers, period. Just having to deal with tech challenges and really teaching children remotely with all the challenges that the children have at home. For Black and Brown kids, especially for those who are ELL or also are experiencing poverty or in households under a certain yearly income, the challenge is also magnified. And the most important thing is to make sure that they have access to instruction, which I know our district has worked towards by providing devices to everyone. Right now, they're working for making sure that the kids are connected to the internet, so they have not just access to device, but access to instruction. With that introduction, I want to move on to some really what I see as an unexpected benefit that can show up for the ways kids are identified, not using the traditional methods. And I do want to say that although teachers are the ones who see students the most and might be seen as like best equipped to identify them, the research also shows that that doesn't necessarily happen, especially for Black students who are 3 times more likely to be identified as gifted and recommended for gifted or high cap services by Black teachers than by teachers who are not Black. But I wanted to raise the point of one benefit, which I see that children now doing remote instruction have access to apps like IXL, which is a language, arts, and math app. So to them, it might look like games, and they gain points and rewards. There are other similar apps out there like Beast Academy, and I don't know what else. So a lot of these kids, especially those that might not have their potential identified in the classroom, see this as a way, not just as a way of learning, but as a fun way to engage. So teachers have access to those results. So if they see, oh, this kid is doing middle school math and they're in first grade, I mean, that's a clear indication. That might not show up in class if they're doing classroom level instruction in math, because those kids don't have the opportunities to show that they're ready beyond that level.
Thank you. I want to
Can I
stay
add
on that.
Oh, sorry,
ahead.
Trina.
Go ahead, Laura.
I just wanted to add to that too, that I think it's really important if you have like diagnostic screeners or you're using some kind of assessment system that someone who makes decisions as to who's identified is able to look at all students' scores. So that, you know, sometimes, I mean, I've had students in my class before that I didn't necessarily recognize because they were so compliant and just did as they were asked. And so I think it's really important that somebody's looking out at that data, because that helps us find our students of color that might not have blipped onto the radar for the teacher. So I just wanted to comment on that.
Okay. Let's stay on that topic of thinking of remote learning and access. And traditionally, underserved populations have experienced the most barriers to access in remote learning instruction during this pandemic especially. And so what are examples? We heard some examples of barriers, as well as ways districts are removing those. I'd love to hear from other districts of examples of ways that those barriers are being removed.
I can share what we're working on here in Clover Park. We're just south of Tacoma. And I think, like so many of our colleagues that are in this similar role, we've really upped the ante on ensuring that students have technology in their hands, that we're ensuring that there's Wi-Fi, hotspots, those kinds of things. We have, and I'm sure we're not alone here, the most tenacious educators. I sat in and observed a class yesterday, and the teacher talked about a student struggling to access the Khan Academy piece they were doing, and through screen sharing couldn't get it done. The librarian looked up the student's address and went to their house to stand next to them and get it done. So we have folks that are really going to incredible lengths. That said, I think really some of what's been put in place, like Christine mentioned about some of these additional digital tools, are allowing for some of the adaptive practice and the acceleration for students in different subject areas, because I know there's a real pinch for teachers as far as the amount of time it's taking for them to think through how they're planning in different ways. One of the pieces that we're really working on, and I'm working with some folks today about this, is engaging families in two-way, real honest two-way dialogue and communication in an ongoing fashion. And we've had some real success in frequent check-ins with families, because I think that as much as, like, I have kids at home, I know what we've been challenged with, but I can't assume that the challenges that I'm experiencing are the challenges that other families are experiencing, or a hotspot's going to fix it for you. So having that one-on-one check-in time frequently has allowed us to identify sometimes it's a really small barrier, but it's not one that we would have ever anticipated. So I think it just increases the value of really connecting and with every family. We have engagement teams where every single family is tied to an adult on campus. It may be a classroom teacher or not, but that adult is responsible. If they're not checking in, tuning in, we're never seeing the camera turn on or the mic unmute, we're following up to really engage. And aside from getting packets of paper or textbooks or logins to people, I think it's that human component that has allowed us to remove more barriers than anything else.
Thank you, Erin.
I'd just like to add on to that. So in Renton, we have a lot of the same models going on. So we have a lot of dashboards that we've created to visualize like the contact engagement we have with families. We're tracking like login times, even if it isn't during a traditional day. So we can monitor when kids are accessing or submitting work, contacting teachers. And we have a lot of teams that are built at schools. And much like Erin said and shared, like we have teams that go to homes. We have a lot of anecdotal stories of like teams that'll do home visits. Our superintendent actually does home visits with families just to understand also from that perspective of like what is happening at home. How can we access things? We're currently talking about providing somewhat like in our open areas at schools, if we need to start doing some limited transportation so that we can provide the Wi-Fi access, because some of our hotspots, we know our tech team is working with the city and when we know they're working with other groups to try to get that hotspots activated and going, and it's just not working because it's kind of a dead zone. So if we need to open up our facilities so that families can come and access Wi-Fi from our schools, like is that an option and how do we do that safely? So continuing to investigate those things is also something we're doing.
Thank you. I want to stay on the remote learning for a moment, but think of it more specifically. Nancy was talking about the educational environment and the importance of that in our schools. Would anyone be able to share your ideas of what the best remote learning model could look like for a highly capable student this year? And that could include supports within our kind of school structure, our school time, or at-home supports.
Well, I will say we have not, I don't know if anyone's arrived yet, but we did just put a pause on our hybrid. So we know we're at least going for another 8 weeks in our full remote. So now it's time. People thought they could limp on by and now we're like, oh, we're hanging out here. So let's really figure it out. I think one of the pieces that we're really trying to take advantage of is what this allows us to do as far as like project-based learning and some of the inquiry and the things where in a standard 4 walls and 20 desks and 50-minute class periods, teachers felt that they couldn't do because of those parameters. Well, great, those parameters are gone. So we've been talking a lot about starting the year of getting to know our students and their strengths, their interests, their needs, their readiness. And then really working with students around what are we addressing as a whole group? And maybe it is around understanding this kind of project-based learning approach and allowing students to take some of their own pathways as far as their interests, needs, and strengths in their asynchronous time and utilizing these check-in components throughout the week, whether they may be checking in with a teacher, their teacher one-on-one a different time of the week, or they may be checking in with a counselor, those kinds of things. And we're really talking a lot with teachers about evidence of learning and what that means when it's not a MAP test. Because we already know a lot of folks, we just did MAP proctored at home and people are like, well, I can't trust any of this. Okay. I'm not going to argue with you and tell you that you need to trust this. What are the opportunities we have to capture the evidence of student learning? We have things like Flipgrid and Sway and all of these tools that now the kids are way deep in, and they have some more of that space and time, quite literally, to engage in these things. So that's what we're pursuing, and we're pursuing it a lot with our instructional coaches are working with teachers and starting a lot with our cluster teachers. So their students who are highly capable are benefiting from that, but we're raising the bar and challenge for all the students. So we are giving them all an opportunity to engage and grow that potential.
Thank you. Sarah?
So I just want to piggyback on that. I think some of the things that I hear quite a bit from the teachers that I work with is they're having an issue with engaging the students. Students are having a hard time managing multiple tasks from multiple teachers or multiple subject areas. So when I think about like ideal instruction for highly capable students in this kind of environment, I think it would be highly collaborative so that they're working with their peers, but not just collaborative for the students, collaborative with the teachers too. So something that would be multidisciplinary, thematically integrated, where there's some kind of a shared project where all subject areas could assess their standards, but students aren't being stretched in multiple directions, or at least they don't feel like they're being stretched in multiple directions. But there's that authentic application of multiple subject areas, and it with unpredictable outcomes for the students, and a reflection piece at the end. So there's a consistent way of assessing all of the different iterations the students could make of that project. The end.
I would add, I think there's an opportunity as we do this, as my colleagues just kind of shared, but like demonstrating our knowledge is also something, how we do that is different, right? Whether it be a video, I saw Nancy just posted in the chat about some opportunities they've had in their district around, how you submit your knowledge of learning over time. And I think this is going to open up a door for us around like looking at evidence and collecting that. I think it also provides us an opportunity to look at data over time, right? So we're not just looking at the current, as Aaron referred to the map testing, right? So we're doing iReady remotely here, and we get the same concerns like, well, did someone help them? Like, well, how do you cross-check that with other evidence that you already have to validate what it is you're seeing, to show that there's a lot of things we can check ourselves for. And I just want to add, there's an opportunity for us. We've been looking at like other programs. So how do we take a look at diving into something in a project-based model and then incorporating some of our CTE programs at the middle school and high school level? Because we have different funding sources. We have different supports at those to also incorporate who have been doing some of the PBL work in our district longer than some of our standard programs, if you will. And so how do we incorporate those and start tying some of these pieces together? So we're really looking at a more robust system than just high cap and just CTE and just special education, but tying them all together.
I'd like to
piggyback on that.
Go ahead, Laura.
This year we've, sorry, didn't mean to cut you off, Jody.
No problem.
We've actually purchased adaptive, like math and literacy software for all students across the district. And so what's like beautiful about that is often their first assessment will show kind of their starting point or whatnot. And then, and so then you might assume like was a parent sitting next to them as they took that initial assessment. But then as they start to work in the system, it's an adaptive system. So then you can watch, is their progress continuing to kind of match what we saw initially, or is it being adapted downward? So that gives, teachers a little bit better idea of where students are. And then in addition, we're using things like Flipgrid. The teachers have really taken a Nearpod, because Nearpod, you can have students actually do work, and then at the end, the teacher gets like a spreadsheet with student responses and such in it. And so it's such a really great way to see how much the kids engaged and how much they learned by how they respond at the end of the activity. So I just wanted to share those two.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Jody?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I've been working and talking with a lot of teachers and across districts, and I'm hearing from people that they're combining effort, that people are working across buildings and across districts. Since we're working virtually, we don't have to physically be in the same place to teach. And so this summer we had a teacher in Mount Vernon open up his practice to kids across the district with STEM projects that he was working on a weekly basis. So I think I'm hearing that people are getting very much more creative and not feeling like all of the burden of developing something rests on my shoulders, that I have other colleagues, which makes sense, and we've been able to work virtually, but now we have to. And I just wanted to invite people, I put in the chat, if you are interested, we're holding I call it office hours. It's just an open Zoom meeting if you haven't already signed up for Gov Delivery from HiCap. We've been running them about every other week. And it's a networking opportunity for teachers to get together, and a lot of sharing of practices is going on. So I would encourage you, if you're interested, to do that. Thanks.
Okay. I know we're talking a lot about alternative assessments and more of a portfolio of evidence. And so this question goes a little bit against what we're trying to highlight when we're looking at that portfolio. But I think we'd be remiss if we didn't at least address what our district's doing or planning to do in terms of that more standardized assessment as a piece of the portfolio for identification. Are people thinking they will hold on that? Are people looking at alternatives? Different plans around identification and more formalized assessments such as the COGAT or other assessments.
So I can kind of jump in. We just recently met about this topic. So we are going to be doing our locally determined assessments still, even though we have been doing them virtually in an online model. So we'll be using some math indicators and some ELA indicators. And then I think as our presenters at the beginning sort of referenced, we'll also be including some data that we've used from previous years, including report card information and including other previous assessments. And at this time, until we've made a decision to come back for our universal screening, we are going to hold on our cognitive assessments. So we currently give the NNAT3, so we will be holding on that. But our other assessment data points we'll be using in conjunction of looking at other evidence as well.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I can go.
Thanks.
We have an alternative identification model that we're using in some of our elementary schools, and it's specifically so that we can identify students who are not typically identified. And we actually go out and do lessons in the classroom so that we are giving students the opportunity to do some work at a higher level. We can make observations around that work. And then in addition to that, we're collecting, all of the data that we have across the district. We also created a jot down document for teachers that makes collecting information from them a little bit more effective rather than them completing a rating scale on each student. We took the questions or characteristics from the CLED scales and also the HOPE scales. And we put those together and we sat with our Title I leadership and looked through those to choose which ones we thought were most characteristic of our community. And then included those in kind of a jot down form. So it's just a grid with that characteristic at the top, and teachers can just write names of any students in the box under that characteristic. So it makes it a little bit easier than having to think about each student individually and create a document for each. So once that we see, like we choose our students that are performing the highest, then we provide performance tasks for those students in order to be identified for domain-specific services. But also then we still hope to provide some cognitive testing this spring if we're able. And so students that are really strong in multiple content areas could move forward to the cognitive testing as well. And then they have the option of being served in their neighborhood school, or they could move to one of our center programs.
Okay, thank you.
This is Christine. One of the things that I would like to raise, especially as I'm hearing about assessments being done remotely, is I think it's very important that parents and students know exactly with enough notice when the assessments are done, what they entail, and especially for younger students, their parents and caregivers need to be involved. We know that the OSPI guidance about attendance really does not require students to be in online classrooms all day. They can just log in once a day and can be considered present. For some students, really distance learning is not working that well, so they and their parents have decided to really scale back and not be present for the whole day. So I would just really ask you to make sure that the parents and the students know when these assessments are taking place and the importance that they have.
Thank you.
And Pasco, we've put a lot of effort into updating our identification practices. And so we're looking at all of those different pieces that we've put into place over the last couple of years, and looking for opportunities to try to preserve as much of that as possible. And when we can't, looking at either alternative sources of data or alternative methods of administering tests, et cetera. So really looking at all options are on the table right now, but really trying to preserve as much of the former process as we can.
Thank you.
I'd like to echo what Christine said. It's important, and it's in the law, that when a student is really given consideration for identification as highly capable, the parent has to give permission. And that can be electronic, it can be in writing, but if you're moving beyond a universal type of situation, the parent absolutely has to be informed of that. That's very important. Thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you. We're getting close to the end. I want to remind you to put any questions in the chat that you have, and we can try to address those in the time left. And one quick question, and then I want to get to our final question. Laura, you mentioned the CLED scales and some different teacher rating scales that you're using. I'm wondering if anyone can address where districts can get training to use these teacher rating scales specifically around culturally, linguistically, economically diverse learners.
Well, I'll jump in because we have, with Jan and Nancy, over 5 years developed 10 professional learning modules that are online. And there's quite a bit of emphasis on the alternative assessments, how do you use them, and plenty of resources, links within those modules. So that is a resource. And again, I put the link to that in the chat up toward the front of it. So we would love, and I'd love to hear from anybody who wants some assistance with using those in your district. We're really excited. A lot of districts are using it. Sarah took the lead in Pasco and has developed some protocols around how to support teachers. You know, it's really being used in a way that I am thrilled to see, frankly, with the amount of time and energy and money we put into that. So that's great. Yeah.
Jody, can you put those back in the chat again, just to refresh for anybody who may have joined late?
Trina, I'm going to answer a little bit of that question since you brought that up. Okay. Some of the scales that have been used that have a little bit better reliability and have been used with populations of diversity rather than narrow populations that you send instruments to gather data. If you have an instrument in some cases, but not all, that instrument has a training protocol within the administrator's guide. It's just that oftentimes we buy those instruments without the administration examination copy because, you know, that's what costs so much. So for example, when I use the Renzulli scales, the recommendation is to only use 4 of them. And people have to realize that these are traits that are developed through program services. It's not that all kids will have these traits. And so there is a training mechanism within those scales that a specialist or coordinator can offer that to their teachers. You don't need to get a separate trainer to do that work. With the CLED scales were developed by going into the research and looking for evidence of different types of behaviors that some highly capable students within a demographic subpopulation actually demonstrate. And so how I've used those is just to bring it to the table and have colleagues talk about that in light of kids that they might know. Having a conversation about those kinds of behaviors when you haven't been part of teaching in a different culture, you may not even be aware of it. So it's an awareness thing. So there is no professional trainer for that. Okay. If that makes some sense. It's, you know, again, when we look at characteristics, again, you have to be careful of the list. Right now on the internet, you can get a list that says you're gifted if this, but you're only high achieving if you're this. It's not based on any research at all, and it shows up in protocols all over the country. So we kind of have to be careful about that and see the observation instruments as a way to begin to say it's time to look at the profile of a child through all different kinds of instruments. But typically those teacher rating scales don't have an outside trainer for them.
Thank you.
That's just
Very,
so you don't have to go looking.
very helpful.
Yeah.
Okay, so our closing question is thinking of our current circumstance with our COVID-19 closures, and that sometimes with adversity comes opportunity. So I'd love for people just to think of any new ideas and opportunities that have surfaced as a result of the pandemic and the school closures that might be useful to us to improve the way we serve our highly capable students in the years to come. Thinking of that idea of getting back to normal and how can our normal actually be improved because of the experiences that we're having now. So thinking specifically of meeting our highly capable learners' needs in the best way possible. Any silver linings that could be shared that might have implications for us.
I'll be brief because I think I spoke to a lot of this earlier. I think the single largest one is breaking away from that this many minutes and then transition to this next subject. And I'm getting the same minutes in this self-contained class as that third grader in that class over there is getting when we know their needs are different. And we've actually also seen a lot more collaboration. I know Jody mentioned folks collaborating across districts. We serve on a military installation and off. So we basically have a mirror of programs. And this has allowed those teachers to not only collaborate with each other, but support each other's students. Like within their multi-age classrooms, they're regrouping kids. And one teacher is more kind of liberal arts focused and the other one's more science focused, and they're supporting students in the areas of interest in ways that they would have never done if it was their roster of 25 in their building.
That shared ownership is seen in
The
different
use of
ways.
digital learning tools that we mentioned earlier will be huge, along with the collection of student evidence. I think will be long-term impacts that will benefit for a while. And then taking this opportunity to work with teachers on looking at assessment data and comparing it to other evidence points that they see regularly to make sure they're validating their own judgments and decision making.
Thank you.
I'll piggyback on that. I think, when I think about our identification practices and some of the modifications to that we're considering to accommodate the COVID circumstances, a lot of those possible solutions and modifications involve a lot more school involvement, getting PLCs involved. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to get message and information out to teachers in regards to HiCap.
Thank you.
I pretty much echo what everybody else has said. I've really liked watching the teachers work together to create things technology-wise that they can use across their grade level. So that's been a bright spot. I think it's been amazing to see that we have some kids that absolutely thrive in remote learning that may not have performed as well in the classroom setting. So it's been a great opportunity to learn more about students.
I've heard from a number of parents, especially of those twice exceptional kids. They are just delighted at how engaged their kids are now, that they're not having to sit in the classroom and be patient when everything's going on around them. The distractions aren't there. The trade-off, of course, is we want all our kids to have social and emotional relationships with other people. But for some of our 2E kids, they are just thriving.
I want to piggyback on the assessment versus evaluation. One of the things I think people are being so creative about is for the student products to show what they're learning. So the focus has been about what are they learning and how are they sharing it with me and how are they sharing it with others versus, okay, this is an A, this is a B, this is a C, these are the criteria. So I think, and this is true at the college level too, we're all, we've been told to give our students grace in grading. They've, more credit, than versus grades, more looking at focusing on how they can share what they understand versus, evaluating them for what they understand, because you're giving them grace in how they're getting their information. So I think that's been a silver lining. And I've seen examples of what teachers have done with kids on these technology tools, where they're sharing videos, they're sharing Snapchats, they're sharing Instagrams, they're sharing TikToks, all these things that teenagers and people do. And it's like, now school is kind of fun for them because they're able to share what their perspectives. So the more we can do that and the less evaluative we can be, I see that as a silver lining for all of our kids, but especially those highly capable students.
In addition to what I've already heard, it's the opportunity for innovation and really thinking outside the box, doing things differently that teachers and administrators were not able to do because of the rules and whatnot in place. Now there's more potential for flexibility, for creative thinking around how to develop and deliver curriculum. I love hearing so much about the array of services. It doesn't mean that, okay, we've selected these kids as highly capable, they all get the same thing. There's so much range even within that population, and especially when we think about the degree of asynchronicity that children might experience, whether they're neurotypical or not, twice exceptional or not. I loved hearing about local norms, and I hope that in this area of remote learning, that could really happen better, and also really focus on who's not there. Like who's missing. When you look at the data, where are the Black kids, where are the ELL kids, where are the Indigenous kids? So the kids who are usually missing from one, being identified, and two, getting the services delivered. And I'd love to hear more about the potential. I'd love to hear more about those kids identified based on potential. And to me, that is what, screening can do, because otherwise, the kid shows up as they show up in the classroom. If they come, especially from an underprivileged background, with like all the biases that we have, they're seen for behaviors rather than their potential. So what's underneath all that, and how can that come up if all we see is their behavior in the classroom and how they perform at classroom level, but maybe because they're ready to go 2 or 3 years above, and no one has really looked into that. So I would love that potential issue to be explored more, because that's where a lot of Black kids and kids of color are falling through the cracks.
All right, you guys, thank you so much. Thank you. That was a great kind of way to wrap that up too, Christine, with that. Not only what we're seeing as silver linings now with the flexibility, creativity, and opportunity around innovation, but also kind of that forward thinking of where do we need to continue to explore and go next. I appreciate all of you for sharing your expertise with us. I feel very inspired, and I love that the opportunity question around kind of the silver linings of what we're doing is really makes me hopeful for on the other side of this, we can be even better for all of our learners. So Brian, I'm going to hand it back over to you.
Thank you, Nancy, Jan, Jody, John, Laura, Erin, Sarah, Christine, and Trina. Thank you so much for a great job sharing with everybody. Everyone, I'm going to share a slide with you real quickly. Just a heads up to remember that after this presentation is over, you will get a link to this video, and you'll also get a PDF of the presentation that Nancy, Jan, and Jody did at the start of this session. And then really important, there'll be a survey, and we would like you to fill that out, because that gives us direction of where of what it is that you would like to learn about in future sessions. So please pay attention to your email, and please respond to that email and do that survey. We really appreciate everybody here, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.